Please be seated. I saw a meme recently that was the famous picture of Christ all alone in the desert by Ivan Kramskoy. You know the one. He's sitting on a rock in the midst of this completely barren landscape with a pink and orange glow of a sunset behind him, and because the artist is Russian, he looks vaguely like a Karamazov brother. So it's that picture, but the text says, Lent, because extroverts can't have all the holidays. I felt seen. I mean, most of you have figured out by now that I am an introvert, and yes, I actually like Lent. I like the stripping away of unnecessary accretions. I like the invitation to ponder big questions like, are we focused on what really matters? And then waiting, often for a very long time, in great silence for an answer. I appreciate the memento mori of Ash Wednesday and the encouragement to face our temptations, to confront our shadows, and maybe even learn how to dance with them. Now, in many churches, Lent can easily be confused with Advent. Not here, but in a lot of churches it can, because the liturgical color for both of them can be purple. The Gloria is not used in either season. They're both seasons of preparation. They're both penitential. They both take place largely out in the desert, right? In Advent, we get John eating locusts and wild honey and preparing the way of the Lord. And in Lent, we have Jesus tempted and waited on by wild animals. Advent and Lent can appear very similar, but they are in fact very, very different seasons. The Advent desert is alive with possibilities. It's filled with anticipation, with expectation, with the quickening and growing excitement of new birth. The empty space of Advent is a womb, which is not truly barren, really, because Sarah and Elizabeth are only childless from our human point of view, right? From God's perspective, they are still as fruitful as Mary is. The Advent desert is a womb. The Lenten desert is also alive, but it's alive with temptations and filled with dangers and adversaries, which is what the term Satan really means. One who opposes or one who obstructs, which is quite literally what Peter is doing today, which is why Jesus calls him that. In Lent, the empty space is not a womb, but a tomb. And like Jesus, we don't always go willingly into that dry-boned barrenness. We often have to be driven there to peer into that particular void, to try to map that undiscovered country, to reacquaint ourselves with the shadowland. See, Lent is not really an invitation to simply embrace your inner introvert. It's actually a chance to call up and reconnect with, and maybe even embrace your shadows. And we all have a shadow side. We probably all have many shadow sides. Our shadows are all of the ways that we maintain our sense of safety and security and sometimes connection. It's all of those weapons that I mentioned last week, the weapons that we use to protect ourselves or our ego selves, the weapons that we use to control or to avoid or to criticize or to flatter or hoard or manipulate. Lent invites us to take them all out into the bright light of the desert and see the damage that they have done, the damage that we have done with them to all of our relationships with God, with others, with ourselves, with all of creation. One spiritual teacher reminds us that our shadow self is not our evil self. It's just that part of us that we do not want to see. It's our unacceptable self by reason, nurture, and choice. That bit of chosen blindness, or what is sometimes called denial, that bit of chosen blindness is what allows us to do evil and cruel things without recognizing them as evil and cruel. Our shadow self is the log in our own eye that makes us obsess over the splinters in everyone else's eyes. And you all remember what Jesus said about that, don't you? First, take the log out of your own eye so that you can see clearly enough to take the splinter out of your friend's eye. Lent is an invitation to engage in what many recovery programs call making a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, which does not mean just listing out how good and bad we are in order to feel either better or worse about ourselves. You can't win Lent by either scrupulosity or martyrdom. Rather, this is to become aware of those aspects of ourselves that we too often cannot see or will not see or dare not see. And then to become aware of them, but not simply renounce them or abandon them once again to ossify out in the desert where they really only grow in power and strength, but rather to begin working with them, wrestling with them, dancing with them, integrating them. In effect, you might see it as beating our weapons into plowshares, transforming our shadows into tools that can be used to germinate and generate compassion and gratitude and faith and hope and love. See, the point of Lent is not to help us figure out how to give up or take on the right things so that we will perfectly and miraculously avoid all sin. That's not even possible anyway. The point of Lent is really to bring the struggle with our demons, our shadows, our temptations out into the light of day so that we can be honest and upfront about our limitations and continue to grow from them. So that, in the words of another spiritual teacher, so that we can make it easier for others to love us. And I think this has to be one way of understanding what Jesus means by taking up your cross. Because the cross is a double image. It's at least a double image. The shadow side of the cross is as a dark, shame-filled instrument of torture. It's a horrifying manifestation of human cruelty and power and division and hate. And it is only through God in Jesus accepting all of that, with compassion and forgiveness and love that transforms the cross into a symbol of the triumph of love and life over death. So, by all means, give up whatever it is that you feel you need to give up, or take on whatever it is you feel you need to take on during these 40 days. But I really encourage you to do so with the intention of actually learning more about and hopefully integrating more your shadows. Because your shadows will form the cross that you uniquely will need to pick up and carry. And with God's help, begin to transform into the kind of love that actually does change the world. Amen.